So very nice to meet everybody this morning. It's day 2. So what we're going to talk about this morning is how to keep AI in check in your organization from a risk and governance standpoint, risk and compliance standpoint. So briefly, my background, I've been in this business for quite a while. Been in this business going on 30 years. So spent a number of years in public and private industry. And what I find is, sometimes people get all wrapped around the axle dealing with technology and terms, terminology and everything. But really, it boils down to some very basic risk and compliance things that you can do inside your organization. So that being said, we're going to focus on a couple things this morning. Risk and how to address that risk from a remediation and a compliance standpoint. How has AI changed risk inside your organization? Things that for years were pretty standard boilerplate things that you did as part of IT management. Phishing mitigation, how you did that. That's changing significantly. How your supply chain, especially around your code development, on your application development, how you're looking at vulnerabilities, that is changing. Data loss and user access, how to make sure that your data is safe to utilize. And of course, those are always present, how state actors are actually using AI to amplify and to, I would say, make their attacks much more lethal, much faster into your organization. And then on the lower part here, we're going to focus on the remediation. What can you do? And really, that is, right now, that's in its infancy about what you can do inside your organization regarding what you need to do for AI. It's always been, what I have always seen over the years is business is always ahead of security. We all know this. Business goes out and does things because they want to. Namely, they're integrating AI into everything they want to do right now. And they're not saying anything to the security people, asking for, they're not asking permission. It's like having children, right? Kids don't ask permission, they beg for forgiveness. And that's what business people who want to utilize new tools always do. So we're going to walk through some things that you can do in your organization right now from a NIST standpoint, utilizing some of the frameworks from some of the cloud providers. I have Google up here because I happen to like their framework over the others I've seen. What MITRE is doing, OWASP, and finally the EU AI Act, which those of you who have experienced GDPR over the years, you will find that the EU AI Act is very much along those same lines and actions you can take today inside your organization. So everybody ready? All right, let's move on to the next thing. So what is AI? What we're going to be talking about today, as I talked about, is we're going to talk about present state of risk, right? What some of the risks are, and also what you can do inside your organization. I am not going to be talking about any of the generative AI tools, right? I do have one slide with that, though. Any of the security tools using AI, that's all out in the hallway outside and everything. They will talk to you all about all the different tools they use, and really not going to get into the hardware side of things. So I'm sure all of you have seen this, the various stages. And I actually have to update this because I realize I do not include agentic AI in this. So AI's been around for years. It's been in your organization for years. Anybody in the financial service industry? Here? Okay. So all of us get those fraud monitor notifications, right? Those are essentially based on things along the lines of machine learning and deep learning and everything about your user patterns. It's essentially the same concepts. Where it became much more prevalent was when you started to have Gen AI tools coming out, where your end users started to utilize those tools as part of what they're doing in business. So recent survey that actually came out found it very interesting that 30% of all data loss risk inside an organization right now is people using Gen AI to formulate their emails. So how many of you have policies regarding controlling that from a risk standpoint? And a control is not saying no. You just telling your organization to say no doesn't work. You know that your user communities are going to be going around all of that. They find ways to do it. You have to think about the data and the way that the users are using that data. So one thing you'll find from what I'm going to be talking about here is those two fundamentals, right? This isn't an infrastructure conversation. This is about users and the data they access. So one of the things I kind of was thinking about, I talk to people about risk all the time. It's the nature of what I do. And I kept getting a whole bunch of different kind of statements about what people thought risk around AI was. So I decided to ask these four what they thought risk dealing with AI was. And it's interesting, if those are not familiar, you have Claude, which is Anthropic's tool. You have Gemini, which is Google's tool. Copilot, I think all of us know, even, what was I noticing the other day, that Copilot is now embedded in Microsoft Paint. I was, and I used it, not on these, but I actually used it. It works pretty good for cleaning things up. It helps us colorblind people to actually try to do that in Paint. Finally, ChatGPT. So it's interesting the way each of these looked at risk. And it basically comes down to the conversation about how they're learning, right? How they learn is, all about perspective, all about the data that's being added into these models, right? I do find it personally interesting that what you call Copilot was concerned about over-reliance of people on AI. That's why I think Copilot actually builds in a pause, or maybe all of you have noticed that it's kind of like painfully slow at times. I think that's a security mitigation. Personally, I thought it was, I found some of the best answers to this thing dealing with kind of cybersecurity risk around AI to be associated with Claude and ChatGPT. And then, of course, the personal joke I thought was funny that Google is concerned about governance and oversight, which I never thought anything associated with Google would ever, talk about. So, there we go. I love this slide deck. So, as I said, been in this business for a while. Started in the internet, as I like to say sometimes, I started in the internet before there were pictures on the internet. So, yes, I've been in this business for a number of years. When I was in the Navy, I started out on the internet. So, kind of tells you, how my perspective of things. I kind of was thinking, where are we right now from an AI risk perspective inside of most organizations? And I went back 10 years to where were most organizations were when they started to move out to public cloud, AWS, Azure, those type things. And it was the same way. It was businesses going out there, and businesses going out there utilizing, I'll use an AWS term here. They were using S3, they were using EC2, kind of get around us security people, but they felt that we were slow. Buying servers, they didn't want to do that. They just wanted to go consume. AI is about that same point where we started to about this point right now. You're starting to get the frameworks out there. You're starting to get some of the controls that organizations can adopt, right? Granted, literally by the time I started this conversation to the end of this conversation, AI will change. We all know that. There'll be something new. I was noticing it this morning reading, some of the news and everything. But it also goes back 30 years to really when the internet started to come into businesses. And I was thinking about this. 30 years ago, most businesses that were on the internet didn't have a firewall. Maybe they had an access list and an old router, something like that, but that was pretty much it. That's where we are, I think, right now inside our organizations regarding AI is, we're at that infancy phase where we're starting to get some of the controls and everything that we can apply. But now it's getting them in there while also moving at, just massive acceleration as AI is being adopted. So some of the risks I talked about, our old friend, phishing. So All of us know we all have phishing campaigns inside of our organizations, right? We all have it. All of that is in the next year or so, actually right now, really. But really, all that's going to be gone. The use of AI as it applies to phishing is all the old things that we have been teaching people for years. So things like misspelling, things like display names, salutations, all that, gone. And it's not going to be static anymore. We're going to have to build phishing technology much more aggressively into tools themselves. That people are not going to be that front line of defense anymore. Yes, they're going to be that line of defense, but not as much as they used to, because they're not going to be able to look for these basic prompts anymore. It's just not going to happen. Which goes down these lines of some examples that I have here. The one on the left is the one I actually like the most, about where all of us know, I'm sure all of us know spear phishing, right? Nowadays, they are using AI to become using spear phishing to get even more targeted around what your CEO, what your CIO like. So if they happen to see using using a large language model, they need to be able to, say they post something on Instagram that they did. Now all those become much more targeted, much more automated, right? So, and then of course on the other side, this is where, the deepfake videos come in, where a CFO was essentially tricked into a $25 million loss for his company. Now that is becoming even more. I'm going to talk about the whole use of video later on, whole use of that, because I keep consistently hearing about the risk of state-sponsored tech workers who are causing problems for organizations. So, the supply chain risk. So this is where some of our skill sets, some of our tools are not necessarily keeping up with things. So we're all performing application assessments. And we all know that we have issues as various organizations dealing with trusting third-party code. Well, organizations are downloading some of these from various sources, Hugging Face, wherever you want to kind of get them, right? And it's becoming an issue because, well, you don't know where they learn that data. I was at a session about 1.5 years ago down in New York where they were very concerned about this as they were incorporating AI into some of their business intelligence models. So the concern was, what happens if the models that they're utilizing have been corrupted from the very foundation? So this is something I would advise most organizations to just pay attention to from a code standpoint, about where organizations are getting some of this information, what libraries they're using, because it will be, as we move into more of that user and the data they're using, that data piece will be critical. So, data loss. Very simple. It's been, I think, the bane of most organizations for many years, right? And I'll focus on the middle one, the shadow AI risk. So, we've all had shadow IT for many years. Now you have shadow AI, right? Where employees going around security, because they don't want to be told no, are going to be using AI tools, things like that. And this is what I was talking about, that 30% earlier, right, of unauthorized AI tools, just using it for writing an email. But they're not thinking, they're trying to solve their immediate problem, but they don't realize that they are essentially sharing confidential information about the company in these tools, and it's being incorporated into their models. So, that's something definitely to pay attention to. I mean, how many employees nowadays are utilizing, some sort of Gen AI tool on their phone, and they're asking questions in that manner? This is all dealing with data loss. So, right, and also, as I was talking about, the accessing of that data, of users. As I talked about, deepfakes, document forgery. So the previous session, think about what he was talking about, those of you who were in here, right, about being able to create badges and everything else like that. That is all going to accelerate. So to his point about employees that are getting photographs taken, putting them up on LinkedIn and things like that, well, now all those images are being incorporated. So physical security, protecting your badges will become critical inside your organization. Making sure you talk to your employees about things along those lines. And we're going to talk a little more later on about how you need to start to train your employees to protect against AI risk, because it's going to be part of what we do every day. So I was talking about data poisoning, right? Where, the data that you're relying on in your applications to perform that business intelligence, are you sure that it's actually valid? And my favorite one was the scenario on the left here, where, and this actually took place with Google's spam filters. There was a series of emails that were sent into Google spam filters in order to make it think. So essentially, it was being trained to perform a denial of service attack by blocking certain emails, right? Because it was slowly being fed legitimate words and phrases that were being identified as spam. So it was blocking legitimate things. I think we've all seen that inside our organizations right now, where sometimes those spam filters, sometimes whether you're using M365 or things like that, are now starting to pick up on legitimate emails. I mean, I get them multiple times a day, So that's all labor that you need to do. You need to go through those lists and now release them. But, it's going to become more and more prevalent because, we were all still very reliant from a business standpoint on email. So this is my favorite subject about this, because just like most organizations today are utilizing, AI as part of their business plans in order to accelerate, so are our favorite threat actors. They are also accelerating as well. They are utilizing the same tools that you are in different ways. Namely, the Russian Federation is using it more on the financial service side of things. What I found out about the Iranian side of things is they're using it across multiple languages. So how many of you are still have issues with some of where a lot of filter technologies and everything you use are very English-based? Well, think about that along those lines, about utilizing AI to launch an attack written in, say, 40 different languages. Are your filters going to pick up all that stuff? Probably not. Filters as they are right now are not going to pick that up. So I also have on here North Korea. How many of you have seen the issue that North Korea is having, or what North Korea is utilizing AI tools for essentially to apply for IT service jobs? Anybody hear about this? Okay. Anthropic came out with a really good report, I think in September, about how Anthropic is seeing their tools being used. So I recommend, if you have the chance, read Anthropic's threat intelligence report for, I think it was September, where it goes into detail about how North Korean tech workers are utilizing Anthropic and various other tools. So, very good along those lines. And of course, they're all using it for business threats and things like that, especially around China, about being able to break into, certain U.S. industries. I'm sure those of you that are working in either energy or things like that are seeing that. So the threats from the state-sponsored arena are greatly accelerating. And so any of you that are seeing this, you're going to need to start to address it, because the existing tool sets that you have are honestly not going to be able to keep up. So how am I on time? Okay, we're good. So we're going to talk a little bit about remediation and compliance. I know, they're like, really? Right before lunch and we're talking about remediation and compliance. So, simply put, right now, remediation and compliance is a mess. It's all over the place. All of these different regulations on the federal side, state of New York, they're dabbling a little bit in how to address AI, how you're going to, what to do and things like that. They're all over the place. I mean, truthfully, yeah. I mean, state of New York has a few things here, but it's all over the place, which is what I was talking about, where things were 10 years ago with cloud. Thankfully, NIST has started to come out with a risk framework that you can start to utilize, right? NIST has, it's still in its infancy. Those of us that are familiar with working with NIST frameworks and NIST, policy. This is from 2023, and it's dealing with, map, measure, manage, and govern. It's a very simple way to look at this, of how to address, how to work along the lines of addressing risk and compliance in AI in your organizations. So let me move forward here. So yes, my favorite part about this slide, the builder. So, and it's all about knowing how it's being, what NIST and their framework is, it's all about knowing how it's being used in your organization. So mapping, knowing what's being used, how it's being incorporated. Right? This is what I talk about from an application standpoint, where those of us that perform application scans, look at the way applications work. How many of you are aware that, where your AI sources are? I mean, look what just happened, what was it, the drift situation with Salesforce. So you had, an AI tool that was purchased via the Salesforce marketplace. Many organizations used it. I think last saw, I thought about 20 different organizations utilized this tool, plugged it into their Salesforce, and it ended up that being the avenue. That's the third-party risk and compliance that I was talking about. Measuring. So this is something that we as cybersecurity people do badly. We do not measure how we are performing, how we are doing, how we are adding value to our organizations. We don't do this well, right? We are the, it's the reason why a lot of times we have to fight very hard for the dollars that we get as part of our organization. We need to get much better at measuring. I'm very glad that NIST put this as part of it, of demonstrating to business leaders that the money that we're spending actually is effectively protecting organizations. And that's why I was very happy that NIST included it, because it's very important. It's showing, if I made an investment in a tool, in a new AI risk tool, that there's actually value to the organization. It's mitigating some threat to the organization. The old days of, we haven't been breached. That's kind of doesn't work anymore. I mean, it's very difficult. All right? So moving into some of the tools that you can actually utilize. I'm very glad that MITRE actually came out with Atlas, which all of us, I'm sure, are familiar with MITRE ATT&CK, right? This is MITRE's framework for how to mitigate risk around artificial intelligence systems. Many of the things I was talking about regarding identity, regarding data, they're all incorporated into here. Actually, there's a whole category here called credential access, about how to know where it is. Things like discovery. All these type things are all part of this. So my point to you with this is, yes, there are a lot of tools out there right now that are saying that they can protect you against AI in various ways, right? But if I was going to look at two things to focus in on from a business standpoint, is knowing your users and knowing your data. Those are your two most important things. I mean, people, in the old days that I remember, people broke into servers, they broke into, network devices. The people who really want to monetize your organization's data, honestly, they're still doing the same things they've done for years, which is, phishing emails and things like that. As I always say, in this business, 30 years looking back, and everyone is still clicking on those links in email, and they are still opening up those same attachments that we've been telling them for 30 years not to. So, I would very much recommend you take a look at this. Something I didn't include in this presentation, MIT has an AI risk structure as well to take a look at. It's a database. I think and it's available. So you can go through MIT, which MIT has it freely available. You can Google it. I thought it was an awesome tool when I started utilizing it. All right. We all know OWASP. The point I'm making here is the beginnings of the things that you need for your organization are there. OWASP has been around, 15, 20 years, right? Well, they have an AI risk thing. You notice many of the things I've been talking about here. Supply chain, data poisoning. These are all part of the things that you need to be aware of. And what I put on the right is how you can mitigate those. So you see a lot of times encryption is a lot of this conversation, right? I still talk to many organizations that are not decrypting and encrypting their data, right? 90% of threats right now are, 90% of data that's transiting our organizations is encrypted. So if you're not looking at that data for threats, you're just really not looking for the threats deep enough inside your organization. Things like prompt injection. My other favorite one here, the sensitive information. Yeah, that's a personal pet peeve of mine, especially dealing with DLP and employee training. If you don't have the structured policy around AI already in motion in your organization, you're well behind. You need to have that. You need to be able to assess where AI is being utilized in your organization. I think you'd be very surprised. All the way from the top of your organization, from the CEO, CIO that are utilizing, various tools, because, it makes life easier for them. That's something we've always dealt with as security people is, life is, people would, like to utilize tools and everything that make their work life easier, make it more productive. All right. So, as I said, Google's framework, I felt, was the most mature of them. Yes, AWS has theirs, Microsoft has theirs. But I was very impressed with how Google's framework was. Lots of material out there for you to use in your organization, to be able to bring in things like that. Plus, also Google is deeply tied with IBM, NVIDIA, and things like that. Which I saw, yesterday, that Anthropic did some sort of deal with NVIDIA. You're going to see more and more of this, as we're going forward. But what Google is doing, things like I was very impressed with the extended detection and response. So those of us, have, seen things before. In this industry, most of us, because we work 24/7, vast number of us are sleep deprived. We get woken up at 3, 4 o'clock in the morning and things like that. The speed of AI attack, what you're going to see coming, is you're not going to be able to manually have people respond anymore. You're going to have to start to evolve your tool sets. I remember when automation started being used by threat actors, right? Greatly accelerated things, botnets, botnets, and things like that, and utilizing automation. Well, think about automation tied to something that learns as it's attacking you. So it learns your traffic patterns, your employees' patterns, things like that. So relying on humans anymore to be able to perform really response or that initial response is just not going to keep up with threats. All right, so I brought up the EU Act. So those of us that have spent many years with GDPR will recognize this. It is very much built around that same concept regarding data, regarding accessing data. And it's driven by essentially 4 categories. So in the upper right, you see the unacceptable risk, right? And that's still being, still being worked into things and everything, but it's dealing with, fundamental rights and things along those lines. The high risk, infrastructure, education, public services, right? Anything along those lines and using of AI and those tools. Then you have limited risk, and then minimal to no risk. But if you, as you're kind of mapping out how you are utilizing AI tools in your organization, start to take along those lines, because we all know, we all remember when GDPR first came out, that GDPR eventually was adopted in many aspects of U.S. business. So starting to think along these lines about how to take your different applications and tools that you are using and seeing what type of data that they're utilizing to function, I think is a good head start for everyone in this case. But this is still evolving, as it says, what you call it, December 2023. It's not even 2 years old. All right, as I said, our favorite GDPR, which, those of us that have done risk and compliance over the years, GDPR is, it's embedded right now. ISO has its framework out there, right, about dealing with artificial intelligence management systems, about how that functions. CCPA, actually, I should need to update this, because as of, 2 weeks ago, California has now released a framework similar along the lines of CCPA for how it works with AI risk inside the state. So we all know sometimes how California goes, the rest of the United States goes. And lastly, personal information protection law. That is from China. China actually has an AI regulation, which I thought was kind of interesting, since many of the use of AI as an attack vector is coming from China. But they actually have a regulation regarding the use of AI as it pertains to Chinese citizens. So, finalizing things. How to prepare your organization for AI compliance. Start to perform a risk assessment. Start to take things like MITRE and try to plug your organization into how it looks. Find out where AI is being used in your organization. You're going to be very surprised, I think, right? Like I was talking about incident response earlier, right? About that you're not going to be able to necessarily keep up from an incident response standpoint. But what I'm talking about here is following the lines of item 1, so comprehensive risk assessment about where AI is in your organization. Then you have to figure out, okay, what happens if I have an incident involving one of these tools? What do I do? I brought up, which got Salesforce Drift. How many organizations thought about that there was going to be a tool, an AI tool that was utilizing their Salesforce, that data was going to be, that application was going to be compromised? Things like that. What happens if you are utilizing, say an AI pen tester? Those are coming up more and more lately. You have an AI pen tester. What happens if there's a breach utilizing that AI pen tester in your organization? Because you've removed the humans from the AI. So now it is essentially an agentic AI pen tester in your organization that is learning you, that has a vast amount of data. AI governance and policies, what I was just talking about, dealing with ISO, dealing with the EU AI Act. Know your data. As things move on and on, especially from a security standpoint, it is less and less about, it's less and less necessarily about infrastructure and more about, very simply, users and the data they access. I think if you focus that aspect of things, right, you'll be much, that's where, if I was building a policy, especially around AI, it would be around this, around knowing your data, who is accessing it, from where they're accessing it, and don't even bother with the why, because we all know that's an impossible answer, right? How, like I started this conversation, how AI management, how it's being integrated into your business processes, right? Continuous monitoring and improvement goes back to the NIST standard, right? Get better at measuring what you do as an organization, right? Get better at that. Get better at, showing that what you're doing from an AI application, AI applications and things like that, show that you're actually, that what you're doing is effective. And lastly, and this is probably the hardest one of all, is training your employees. So as I said, phishing is not going to, phishing is going to evolve. If you start with probably phishing, you'll be your most impactful inside of your organization. Because, I think you're going to have to, the age-old thing of just getting the phishing emails and everything else like that we've been trained in over the years to look for, misspellings, salutations, all that type of stuff, all that's gone. I'm pretty much sure everyone in this room probably has used, Copilot or something along those lines to write an email, right? Well, think about that being used as an attack vector against your organization. It's going to clean all that up. So, finally, thank you. How much time do we have? All right. Sure. I know everybody wants to go to lunch.
Testing. Well, that's loud.
All right.
If anybody has a question, go ahead and raise your hand. I'll bring you the microphone.
Oh, okay. Oh. Go ahead.
So you mentioned about knowing the, I guess basically the question I had about knowing your users in your organization. How do you find the shadow AI?
Well, there is certain traffic patterns that some of the tools use. There are tools out there that will analyze your traffic, right? Some of the firewall vendors are starting to add that in there. Some of your SIM vendors are starting to add some of that capability in where you're able to see. Your web content filters are also doing that now. So you can start to, that's what I was talking about, not only identifying it, but also measuring it. Where, if you're looking at your web content, just for an example, and you're seeing a vast amount of data where you're approved to go to, say, utilize Copilot. But then you're also seeing a number of your employees that are utilizing, say Claude, which go during the day. Kind of your question would be to yourself is, okay, why am I seeing that? And what data is then going out there? Do we need a policy that, because we're M365 and we want to then incorporate Copilot into things, that's the acceptable tool to use. I was with a CISO recently who was still taking the position of no, not going to allow any generative AI tools to be used in the organization. And it kind of came across that they're already doing it. They're already utilizing the tools. You need to get visibility into those tools. So it's start dealing with gathering the data, being able to provide measurement for, are we talking about 1 or 2 users, or are we talking about 1 or 2,000 users that are utilizing something that is outside the parameters of your policy? Sure.
When so many companies have taken the position of no browser left behind in deploying plugins, they make it really hard for people not to use it.
They do.
But my question was, do you know what the status of the U.S. national data privacy regulation is and how that interacts with everything you've said? I know that's in some phases.
Oh, U.S. is all over the place. I'll just be very,
No, but there's a specific legislation that's in
I know there is.
process. I was wondering what the status was and how that.
at the top of my head, I don't know what that is. I mean, as you know, as I was talking about, it's just very much right now, the U.S., those of us that remember 10 years ago, not until NIST came out with, 53 and 171, which we're dealing with, mostly were applied to cloud infrastructure. I think you're going to start to see that what NIST is doing with their framework, with their risk framework, is start to see that that's going to be the tool that is going to be measured against. I think you're going to see auditing start to adopt that view of things, right? Which then will drive the rest of the industry of how to assess risk by AI use. Any other?
Yeah. Do you think that there's like a future where a lot of like the fields in cybersecurity could be automated?
I'm sorry, I couldn't.
Do you think that there's a future where things could be automated in the future by AI?
Oh, absolutely. I mean, I think where you're going, like I was talking about agentic AI, is you're talking about autonomous use of AI. I mean, most of us who have done incident response over the years and things like that realize having a human perform the initial incident response, the containment phase, nowadays, they're probably already been in your organization and extracted all the information they want by the time your feet are in slippers. So, no, you're going to start to see, because of the increased speed of things, and you'll hear this term, the autonomous architecture, you're going to start to see that. Any other questions?
Yeah, you mentioned auditing. So talk a little bit about auditing and logging. So with a lot of these tools, especially agentic AI, that runs under user context, it is very difficult to discern whether the action was performed by the user or by AI. And a lot of the logging and auditing capabilities seem to be lagging behind. Can you talk a little about some best practices there?
Yeah, that is true. I mean, where you start with is, as with all types of, with your organization and all that, is you start with the low-hanging fruit. Like I described earlier, find out what's being used. You're not going to be able, we all know we're not going to be able to deal with, those one-offs here and there. Those are very difficult. Those are people who find ways around things. You're going to have to come up with other controls that deal with that. But I think going back to the NIST way of looking at things, where you're measuring, knowing what I hear many times for organizations, one of the questions I always ask of organizations is, what's your number one application? Do all of you know what your number one user application is in your organization? Right? I can tell you what mine was for years, YouTube. YouTube was my number one bandwidth application that I had for many years, right? I think that's one of those things, is gaining that visibility into what your users are actually doing, and also knowing where your data is, right? We know they're going to be using the tools to write emails. We know this. We know they're going to be using the tools to do research, right? I do it myself. What you need to know is the data that they're using to perform those tests. Does it violate any sort of regulations? Does it violate HIPAA? I mean, I think there have been a number of cases where, patient data was put out in the writing of emails. I dealt with one not too long ago. That was, healthcare data that was going out to a cloud. The organization was completely not aware of it, that the tool that they were using was sending data out to the cloud. So I think, to your point, the auditing aspect here is going to be continuously evolving. I think the way you meet that is by knowing where your data is going, knowing what your user community is doing, and continuously measuring that. So, any other questions? All right, thank you very much, and enjoy lunch.
Thank you, David.